on something as sensitive as proscribing Palestine Action, then you need to make your case better, is just leading to a hemorrhage and a kind of a deeper fissure in Britain about what is the right of free speech and what is not.
And the critique that can be made, whether this is fair or not, is that the government is trying to oppress dissent and dissatisfaction about the Palestine issue, because what is in their name? Palestine Action. And that is a big optics problem, political problem, if nothing else, for a government where this issue splits the Labour Party right down the middle.
The chants of "shame on you" are protesters furious at police arresting a disabled, blind protester who was in support of Palestine Action. Hundreds of people have been arrested since the organisation was proscribed.
This group has been staging direct actions in the name of Palestine for months. In July, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, banned it, saying it was a terrorist organisation. Given that it wasn't threatening anyone with violence, can that be right? And can it be right still that hundreds of people protesting peaceably have been arrested for supporting them? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Lewis. And some background on this in case you've not been following it in great detail. It's only really been a story for about a month or so. This goes back to July, so last month. In July, the government officially proscribed Palestine Action, i.e. they banned it, as a terrorist group under the Terrorism Act of 2000. Yvette Cooper, citing the Home Secretary, citing its involvement in vandalism at RAF Brize Norton, a military base, and other direct action protests where they'd broken in and caused damage, and the government said had been threatening to those places. Since then, over 700 people have been arrested, not for being involved directly in the group or being involved in any other direct action, but instead for showing support for the group as akin with that legislation. So many arrests tied up to peaceful demonstrations with people holding up signs reading things like, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." As recently as the 9th of August, so 10 days ago, during a protest in Parliament Square, around 500 demonstrators were initially arrested. That's the largest single-day haul in over a decade. That number later rose to 532. And it's not just in London. There have been protests up and down the country. The Home Secretary, for her part, has defended the ban. She said in an article in The Observer on Sunday, "The clear advice and intelligence given to me earlier this year from the UK's world-leading counter-terrorism system was that Palestine Action satisfies the relevant tests in the Terrorism Act. For a Home Secretary to ignore all those security assessments advice would be irresponsible." And she said there are things that she knows that she cannot reveal which further justify the prescription of Palestine Action.
So this is where it gets complicated, because my suspicion is that of those 500 and however many people who were arrested following the protest, they want to see action about Palestine. There is a distinction there between kind of being concerned about everything that is unfolding in Gaza and actually supporting the group. And I suspect that many of those people are just really, really concerned that voices are not being heard, and you've got the right to protest, and proscribing groups that look like they are raising issues about Gaza shouldn't be banned. And I suspect they're less interested in some of the things that Palestine Action have done. And of course, one of the things that, led to the Home Secretary talking about the need to prescribe was the raid that took place, was the alleged break-in at a defence systems company in Bristol in August 2024, Elbit Systems UK, which I think is an Israeli defence firm, but operating perfectly legally in Britain. And 18 people have since been charged, which are denied, including criminal damage, assault causing actual bodily harm, violent disorder and aggravated burglary. And of course, because that is going through the courts, there's a limitations of what the Home Secretary can say, because she might prejudice any subsequent trial that is due to take place.
Yeah, but yes, that is all true. But nonetheless, it is also true that the proscription, the prohibition of Palestine Action is unusual, even under the terrorism legislation. And this is why it's controversial. It's not just because you're seeing 500, 700 people who are clearly peaceful, often little old ladies or, like people who would not normally be associated with terrorism, being arrested on the streets of London. Number one, most groups which have been prescribed in the past are foreign-linked terrorist organisations. So it's like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, and it is therefore unusual, and it gets people's backs up, or at the very least people are curious as to why a group like this, which is not involved in anything like that, which has not threatened violence against people, would be prescribed. The UK ones which have been prescribed in the past have generally been involved in the Northern Ireland conflict, so like the UVF or the IRA or whatever it happens to be. Palestine Action, banning it is unusual because it's a homegrown movement whose stated goal is political activism through direct action rather than through armed conflict or threatening people, individual, with violence. And the argument, therefore, is that given that prescription has typically been applied to groups which are linked to serious violence and serious threats to life, and Palestine actions involve property damage and sabotage, albeit with a political intent and against government property and military bases and so on, that therefore that is unusual, and that therefore the prescription has been applied unduly harshly. And the net result, whether you think, and I think this is the political problem for the government, whether you think that prescription is right or not, what it has led to is a political optics problem, which is you end up, a really big problem, which is you end up with people who are protesting peaceably, people who clearly, when you look at them, you would not imagine would be involved in a terrorist group, however nice or unpleasant as that is to say, it is just a fact, being arrested en masse. And the critique that can be made, whether this is fair or not, is that the government is trying to oppress dissent and dissatisfaction about the Palestine issue, because what is in their name? Palestine Action. And that is a big optics problem, political problem, if nothing else, for a government where this issue splits the Labour Party right down the middle.
Yeah, well, I mean, arguably, it doesn't split it right down the
No,
middle.
no, that's probably right.
It splits it two-thirds, three-quarters are against the prescription of Palestine Action. And you've had the Labour MP Stella Creasy and Labour peer Lord Hayne, and Peter Hayne, in his heyday was very active in the anti-apartheid movement and direct action and interrupting cricket at Lord's during one test match, have written to The Guardian today calling for urgent police guidance to be issued to head off the car crash, I'm quoting, that prescription enforcement is rapidly becoming. And they said, going after people with a poster testing the boundaries of liberty, some who may or may not even support Palestine Action but feel strongly about Palestinian rights, confuses rather than clarifies the government's intention. People must be able to protest about the horror in Gaza, and the focus should be on what is happening in Palestine, not in Parliament Square. Now, these are two, big names in the Labour Party who've come out and said, look, whatever the rights and wrongs of Palestine Action, the way this is being enforced is just leading to a hemorrhage and a kind of a deeper fissure in Britain about what is the right of free speech and what is not. And surely, a little old lady holding a Palestine Action poster,
or a priest, a vicar,
or a priest or a victor, or the engineer from Brighton who had printed a T-shirt with very similar lettering to Palestine Action, but it said Plasticine Action.
Yeah, I think this is a nightmare for the police because they have their obligations under the law. And look, the law is clear, and maybe this is a good opportunity for us to, as a country, think about actually just how much power the government has, which they probably would not have if we had a system like the United States with a set of constitutional rights. How much power the government has here to define what protest is and what is a terrorist group and what's a direct action group. Because the Terrorism Act 2000, which was passed before 9/11, so it's even before the kind of heyday of that, is very, very broad. It gives the Home Secretary enormous powers, basically, to define what a terrorist group and what isn't. And on the basis of the Act, I don't think there's any doubt that she can say that it is. So the Terrorism Act says that the action has to involve either serious violence against a person, serious damage to property, well, tick, and that the use of that threat is designed to influence the government or an international government or to intimidate the public or a section of the public. Well, it's definitely designed to influence the government. And the use or threat is made for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. Well, again, tick, tick, tick. So under the legislation, there's no doubt that Yvette Cooper can say, yeah, this is a terrorist group. The question is whether she ought to have that power and whether she has, and even if we don't want to get into that slightly more abstract question, has she used that power, that discretion that she has, wisely? And I think that there is a real question as to whether she has used that power wisely, because she must have known that the net result of this would be that people who are not involved with the group but who are expressing support for the group, which can be elided with support for Palestine itself, would be getting arrested, and the consequences we've seen ensue.
Look, given the sensitivities, the polarisation, the very deep feelings that there are about the Gaza issue on both sides, you would have thought that the communication of this would have been better, in the sense that, okay, I'm sure there are things she cannot say because of national security grounds, or it's classified, or whatever it happens to be. It's intel from MI5 and they don't want it put into the public domain for whatever reason. I accept all of that. Government cannot be totally open all the time. But on something as sensitive as proscribing Palestine Action, then you need to make your case better. And you need to have called in the key people and taken them through it and said, this is why we are doing what we are doing. This is why we need you to support us. It will be controversial. And it also needed a communication with the police about how to sensitively handle these things, because the police see a law being passed. What do you do? Their job is to enforce. And I kind of thought it at the time of the coronation, and it was the kind of the Republican groups who were going to be singled out and arrested. And I just thought, yeah, I know, but we've got a right to protest in this country, and let's not be too silly about it.
I just do not think, whatever you think about the group itself, the optics for Britain as a democracy of seeing these people hauled away for what at least ostensibly appears pretty innocuous. And the group is definitely, if we accept that it's a terrorist group, it's on the very lower end of the sort of things that those groups do, is a terrible look for British democracy, and it's getting noticed around the world. And not only is it a terrible look, but it also potentially empowers exactly the sort of people who we would not want to empower. And I'm talking, for example, about far-right groups who are proscribed under the current legislation. Why? Because they get to say, look, you see, we told you, this is what the British state does. When it doesn't like something, when it's got a group that it doesn't agree with, it doesn't talk to them, it doesn't reason with them, it brooks no dissent. It allows no dissent. And that's true on the left, and that's true on the right. And it legitimizes their idea that there are these people that are being prosecuted and that are being discriminated against and being oppressed and being driven underground. So I think that is the danger with it. It is that it makes it look like the British government will not allow dissent on something that it dislikes. And on an issue as sort of hot as this, as you say, John, as contentious as this, it's a real problem. I think maybe the case would have been to look at the legislation to say, look, okay, maybe this group does need to be proscribed, and that it would have been far better, as you say, if Yvette Cooper had been more open. In the 21st century, I think you just have to be. People aren't just going to accept it because the state says it.
Trust me, I'm a politician.
Yeah, well,
it's
exactly.
Not great.
Does that mean that everybody who turns up with a placard that is expressing some support for that group, should they be arrested? I'm not so sure.
Just as an aside, I just want to travel down a little byway, a little tiny lane for a moment to say that I haven't noticed much opposition to the proscribing of Palestine Action from those free speech warriors like J.D. Vance and the State Department. They seem to be quite comfortable with that bit of legislation that this government has passed and haven't spoken about that. Whereas if you're protesting outside an abortion clinic,
well, quite so. I mean, that's always the same thing. Always the same thing with these things. It's free speech as long as I agree with it. And that's what's important. But I mean, I do think on the left and right, there probably ought to be a bit more of a sort of bit more introspection about that question, because it is true. If this were like a far right Tommy Robinson type thuggery group, would I be sat here and be as bothered about it? No. Like, if they were doing exactly what Palestine Action had done, if I asked myself honestly, would I be bothered about them being proscribed? No, I wouldn't be. So I think that, the truth is that with all of these things, I actually think generally we need to be erring on the side of being libertarian about free speech in all manners, in all areas. Even this isn't just about free speech because they're committing violence and so on. But generally speaking, I think we all need to ask ourselves searching questions about whether we agree with the group or if it being prescribed or whatever it happens to be, just because we disagree with them or otherwise.
I think it's really complicated because I think that, on the threshold of the act as it is currently, and exactly as you set out, Lewis, when you went through the detail of what, leads to a tick against the name of Palestine Action, Palestine Action probably have done some pretty bad things. It's not putting people in orange jumpsuits. I mean, it's not that, but it's still on the side of where you think, okay, they should be prescribed. But then when you get people coming out, little old ladies and vicars coming out and holding a placard, there needs to be a degree of sensitivity about, are these, terrorist enablers? No, they're not. And the policing of this needs to be sensible. But, the police are then left in a bloody impossible position. They're there to enforce the laws of the land.
Right, well, after this, we're going to be speaking to Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who has said today that the prescription of Palestine Action ought to be reviewed. Stay with us.
And we are joined now by the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. Thank you for being on the News Agents. You've said that the terrorism legislation needs to be reviewed. You abstained when it came to the Commons. Why?
Well, we raised our concerns when the government was pushing this through. They, I think, abused process by adding to the piece of legislation two organisations which clearly should be prescribed, but we couldn't amend it. So Lisa Smart, the Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson, set out why we felt that Palestine Action, while it was a criminal group who had committed damage to property, including at military sites, that we were not convinced by what the government had said, that they met the bar of being prescribed under the terrorism legislation. So we've initiated, right from the start, we've expressed our concerns. And then, of course, we saw those protests, those peaceful protests in Parliament Square, when so many people were arrested, the police doing the job that they've been asked to do, but were arrested for essentially wearing T-shirts and the like with the name Palestine Action. And I think many people looking at those images said, come on, these people are exercising freedom of speech. They are peacefully protesting. This is not the way the terrorism legislation was originally intended for. And that's why the Democrats have raised this. And we've contacted the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation and asked him to look at it.
So just let me go back a tiny bit. You abstained in the Commons because you felt the government hadn't made the case. Ed Davey, you're a member of the Privy Council. Isn't this exactly the type of issue where the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, would say, come and have a chat on Privy Council terms so that you can understand better why we are doing what we're doing?
Our Home Affairs spokesperson, Lisa Smart, did get a briefing, but she wasn't convinced even with the briefing. Now, maybe she wasn't told everything, who knows? But we have had that briefing. And you've got to be really careful when you prescribe groups, particularly the way the terrorism legislation works. I mean, essentially, the people who were arrested in Parliament Square weren't all members of Palestine Action. Let's remember, they just were wearing clothing which had that name on. Indeed, one person got arrested because he had a T-shirt saying Plasticine Action. So this is the problem that the terrorism legislation has created. And I think we do need to have a balance here. Of course, we need to crack down on terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on. And Liberal Democrats have been firmly behind that legislation and the action of the police and the security services against those terrorist organizations. But in this situation, we are unconvinced that the bar was cleared on Palestine Action, and the way it has then turned out that people just exercising their democratic rights have been arrested. I think that should make us all really worried.
But couldn't the Home Secretary have been accused of double standards if she hadn't done this? I mean, for example, the Terrorism Act defines terrorism to include serious damage to property carried out for political ends. Now, there's no doubt that has occurred. These people, the people not with the placards, but the people who have attacked British military installations, they've broken into factories, they've damaged sites, even RAF bases. If someone associated with, say, ISIS did that, or Al-Qaeda did that, or a far-right group, or the Football Lads Alliance, or someone like this, these groups which have been prescribed did that, would say they were terrorists, wouldn't they?
Well, first of all, those actions by Palestine Action were completely wrong. They were acts of crime, and they could be and should be dealt with very, very hard, punished hard. But you don't need to use terrorism legislation to do that. And therefore, when you talk about Al Qaeda and ISIS, I think everyone is really clear. They more than met the bar for being a terrorist organization, were rightly prescribed.
The UVF, Football Lads Alliance, far right. I mean, there are different sorts of groups who aren't as bad as those
and not all
that
of them
you just mentioned.
Well, there's a lot of groups who need to be monitored and watched and punished when they commit crimes, but they aren't all designated as terrorist organizations under the terrorism legislation. And there has to be a proper debate on each individual case. And the problem is the way the government did it. They had two organizations that we weren't disputing that should be prescribed. And they linked in Palestine Action, where we don't felt they made the case seriously and properly and fully. And so, yeah, we think this needs to be looked at. Absolutely.
But when activists break into an RAF base or an arms factory, there's a real risk to the people who work there. And they're doing it for political reasons. And normally when we associate violence or political violence with the name of a cause, which is what these people are doing, we describe it as terrorism.
Well, I think the criminal acts that are committed by members of Palestine Action should be punished very, very severely. I don't think that's a question. The Democrats have made that really clear throughout. And it was serious because it was against a military base. And we couldn't have been more open about our desire to see these people punished. But I really don't think the government has yet made the case that results in them being prescribed as a terrorist organisation.
Okay, so if you say it is criminal, there is a case going through the courts. It concerns an alleged Palestine Action raid onto Elbit Systems UK in Bristol, an Israeli defence firm but operating legally in the UK. And 18 people are denying charges including criminal damage, assault causing actual bodily harm, violent disorder and aggravated burglary. Now, this is politically motivated. It's not, the allegations are that this was motivated by political differences and not criminal intent. It's not like they wanted to nick something and then flog it kind of on the black market. It was politically motivated.
Yes, but I think you're making my case that these people can be prosecuted under existing legislation.
But the point is, it's not just conventional. Right. It's not conventional criminal activity. It is politically driven in support of a cause. It's not the usual criminal code.
Well, first of all, I do think the criminal code comes into play. And secondly, I would argue that there is political activity that is different from terrorist activity. I'm sure there has been political activity over many decades, which no one would describe as terrorism. And I think there is a clear distinction. That is why, let's be clear what we have done. We have asked the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Jonathan Hill, QC, to look at this. And let's have a debate about where this line should be drawn, because I don't think it is really clear enough in the legislation. And that's why I think this review is required.
And on Sally Rooney? Should she be prosecuted if she comes to Britain and says what she said, to an Irish newspaper?
I don't know all of the details of what she said to an Irish newspaper. Let's see.
Well, she said she wants to continue to support them financially.
Well, I don't know which different law would be applied. I don't think a terrorism law should be prescribed. It should be used in this case. That's why we have been concerned about the prescription.
And just on one other thing, Ed, obviously Prime Minister's been in Washington and has been at that extraordinary sort of almost summit at the White House. He said that he thinks we're further forward as a result of Donald Trump's efforts than we've been, closer to peace than we've been before. Do you agree with that?
I hope we are. Difficult to be sure, isn't it? The concern I have is that President Trump seems to be more interested in a deal with President Putin than thinking about the interests of Ukraine or indeed the interests of European security, for that matter. And while it is right that there is talking, there's a hint that the US may give some support to guarantees from Europe of the future security of Ukraine. It's too vague. I think anyone who thinks that this has really moved the dial and maybe a bit wishful thinking. I hope it has, but I think the jury's out.
Would you trust Donald Trump, what he says?
Well, I'd certainly trust him more than Vladimir Putin, who I don't think we can trust at all.
It's a low bar.
But I think we should, we shouldn't suspend our judgment when it comes to this president of the United States. Many previous president of the United States, I've been willing to give the benefit of the doubt. What President Trump has done and said should make us all really reflect on whether or not he's going in the right direction. So let me take you back to the security guarantees that he may or may not have given, because it's all so vague. Question is, what price is he going to exact from Ukraine? It has been reported that he wants them to give up land that they're currently defending. I mean, that would be an unacceptable price. The fact that he's given a concession to Putin that there doesn't need to be a ceasefire, I find that really deeply alarming. So, let us hope that Trump delivers a peace that Ukraine can willingly sign up to. I'm not convinced yet.
Ed Davey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you could talk about by air, because nobody has the kind of stuff we have. Really, they don't have. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if a deal is made, famous last words, right? But I think if a deal is made, I think Russia's had it. They've all had it. And for a very extended period of time, I don't think.
So that is Donald Trump, the morning after the night before, appearing on Fox and Friends, and maybe giving a tiny bit more on what a security guarantee could look like. America will be at 36,000 feet and European troops presumably on the ground. And you can see that is where the direction of travel is. But still, so much of it feels so vague about what progress was made last night, even though, of course, European leaders are heralding it and saying it was a major breakthrough.
I think that interview with Fox and Friends, which made me laugh, actually, because they described it as his first interview since last night. 7 a.m. in the morning, Washington, just shows how many interviews Trump gives that, not doing one for 12 hours is considered an exclusive and a coup. It just shows how fantastical quite a lot of yesterday was. And to be honest, how fantastical it all is, even in Trump's mind. I mean, even when he said there, I don't think it'll be a problem, to be honest, if we get a deal, with sort of Western troops on the front line, as a security guarantee. I mean, the Kremlin has overnight said that that's never going to happen. They've said that, in fairness to them, throughout. Why would they accept it? This entire war has been about the idea of Russia not wanting NATO or anything like NATO, and it won't matter if it's under a NATO aegis or it's under another aegis to them, having troops on the front line. And Trump there, again, all over the place, so inchoate on exactly kind of what these security guarantees might be or might not. Maybe they involve something about the air, maybe they don't. And as we were saying on the 106th show that we did on it last night, it was, this is the main bit. This has been written up extensively. European leaders focusing on the idea of security guarantees, saying what a big game changer it is and so on. Like, let's be real here. Let's be real. Trump signed up to nothing. He signed up to nothing. It's clear even in his own head he doesn't know what that means or what it might mean. Now, on one level, I suppose the fact that he's even countenancing it is an interesting thing. He probably wouldn't have done 3 or 4 months ago. But my God, there is a long, long way to go before we get any real sense at all of what it might mean, even if it continues to exist.
But that sense of fantasy politics, I thought, came out when, Trump was talking about how Putin just wants to get this over and Putin is ready to make a deal and all the rest of it. And you look at everything that has come out of the Kremlin and what has been said by Russia, what has been said by Sergei Lavrov. I've never wanted to be more wrong on anything than I am about Ukraine. But it looks to me, as we sit here now, and I hope to God I'm wrong, is that I can't believe that there is going to be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. I think that Russia will say, well, these certain conditions have to be met before we sit down with you. Putin is not going to want to sit down as an equal with Zelensky.
He's called him a Nazi.
He doesn't think Ukraine has a right to be what it is. All those things. And so I find it hard to believe that is going to happen. And, the security guarantees don't become operable unless there is an agreement between Putin and Zelensky about what a peace deal might look like. And so, yeah, it was better than 6 months ago. Hurrah, hooray. But have we really pushed the ball further towards a settlement, towards some kind of comprehensive peace deal? I'm still not convinced.
And it was only better than 6 months ago because Zelensky and the European leaders have all agreed to live in the fantasy. They've all agreed to live in Trump's fantasy slipstream, where everything's possible, where maybe Ukraine was partly responsible for the war, where Biden was responsible for the war, where it would never have happened if Trump had been president. The only way in which this is better is because they're all agreeing with him on his many fantasies. And at some point, the sort of game between Europe and Russia is who can live in that fantasy slipstream for longer, and who does Trump come out of it hating more or disliking more. That's the game that's being played. It's not really about, keep coming back to this point, but it's true. It's not really about the deal. It's about keeping Trump on side. And that's what all of it was about. You mentioned Lavrov. Lavrov has said this morning, any Putin-Zelensky meeting has to be, quotes, prepared extremely carefully.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we all know what that means, right? Russia will only agree to a deal that, quotes, respects its security interests. The, quotes, foundations of Ukraine's recognition as an independent state would disappear if it aligns with the West. Again, we all know what that means. We'll be going back in. So honestly, John, I'm like you. Everywhere else seems to be sort of getting a bit wrapped up in some of the sort of optimism around it. I don't think we're any further forward than we were 6 months ago. I really don't. I just think we're just living in Trump's mind palace.
Yeah, I read some reports coming out of the US from people I respect saying, no, this was a game changer and the relationship has been reset and there are some real challenges for Vladimir Putin now. I still think the fundamental problem is that Putin hasn't changed an iota.
And he thinks he's winning.
And therefore, the terms that he would want a peace deal on are terms that would be totally unacceptable to Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian people and to most of Europe. So in this whole fantasy slipstream that you kind of elegantly describe it as, there is a point where the rubber hits the road, to mix metaphors. There is a point where you have to confront these issues and who is prepared to compromise. And at the moment, it looks like Russia wants stuff that Ukraine cannot possibly give. And therefore, in that situation, what is the progress that can realistically be made? Sure, on the security guarantees, you can start preparing for a situation where there is a comprehensive peace deal, but you have to get the comprehensive peace deal first. And that still seems to me as far away as ever. This time, really, before we go, I thought you might like to hear how we tried to start the podcast today. We are such broadcasting pros. So I'll start, yeah? It's John.
It's Lewis. Oh, I thought you wanted to say something.
No.
Oh, right, okay, fine.
I just heard you saying, I'm going to
Oh, no,
start.
sorry. I thought, okay, fine. All right, let's try again.
Should we start?
Let's start again. You know what? That was... let's just leave that in.
This is how the sausage at the newsagents is made. Chaotically.
We're not actually using that, surely. Yeah.
It's John.
It's Lewis. And some background on this, in case you've not been following it. And it's actually... Take three.
Take three. It's John.
It's...
Take four. It's John.
It's Lewis. And some background on this, in case you've not been following it. Well, at least, look, I mean, that was a dodgy intro, but at least it was better than Fox and Friends outro today with Trump. You know what they said? What their final line was to him as they wrapped up? They said, well, we've got to let you go, Mr. President. You've probably got lots of other wars to go and solve. Pass me the vom bucket. Honestly. Can you do the vom emoji on a podcast? We can try.
We'll be back tomorrow when we've cleared our stomachs. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.